Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks everybody for watching, and welcome to this presentation that we're basically following a series here that we're entitling "All This Sainted Difference," based on Robert Ferris Thompson's wonderful phrase that he offered us. We're really privileged to have Ivor Miller with us this afternoon, this evening. Ivor is a scholar and a practitioner. He is the author of this book, Voice of the Leopard, as well as another book called Aerosol Kingdom. And I heard Ivor present on this material a couple of months ago, and I was like, you know what? Ivor is talking in a language that I think our community and our congregation understand and will resonate with. And so I reached out and just wondered if he would be willing to share with us some of his research about both Cuban Abakua and his research in Africa as well. And so he's going to take us through some of this stuff. It is a deeply beautiful, it is a mysterious, it is a world that I think we need to know about. And so Ivor, welcome and thank you for being with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you from here.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Great to be with you. I hope we can do this in person, face to face in the near future. I hope that we're going to have a conversation here. I just don't want to be a talking head, but I want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got into all this, and how, to me, I've always been a world traveler. My father was a traveling academic. I was raised in Beirut from 3 to 5, or from 5 to 8, and then moving around the US. And I have two Cambodian brothers, foster brothers. I have a Lebanese foster sister, and I've been doing volunteer work in Africa for a long time. My life changed when I was a student at Hampshire College, and I found African dance, and I studied with a working class Black American who had studied in Africa, and dancing totally changed my life because I was a very kind of repressed, unhappy guy, and the dance put me in touch with my own body and myself, and it was just wonderful. And we were reading books on Africa, and one of the books was Robert Ferris Thompson's African Art in Motion. So what did I know? Nothing. And I applied to go to Yale when I graduated to study with Thompson after dancing professionally, because I was dancing in the ballet modern world, Tartar Tharp kind of style dance in New York City. And I missed the African thing because of it's organic. You're working with the musician. You're not a tool of the choreographer. It's a different thing. So, and my teacher always encouraged me, if you want to go further in this, you must go to Africa. And so I went to Africa twice as a volunteer with Africa Crossroads Africa, which is a wonderful organization, and I urge you guys to check it out. It was created by a Black pastor in Harlem who started bringing in white Columbia University students to help rebuild a church in Harlem. So it was always based on this idea of communal work, of people who don't normally meet and from different economic backgrounds. And so that's what Crossroads Africa did. And I went to Ghana for one trip. We built a gari shed. Gari is a food made from cassava. And we built a school in the Gambia. So by the time I went to study with Thompson, I had already been to Africa. And Thompson turned me on to the Cuban heritage and Haitian heritage, and which I got to know a little about in New York. And so all these things were happening for me, and I was living them, not just studying them. So that's important, experiential education. And I was a person who grew up just kind of feeling that the natural world was a sacred place. I don't know how that happened. I just kind of knew without anyone telling me, wow, the woods are a holy place. So I went to Cuba and I had an encounter with the drumming initiation group known as Santeria, which is really the Yoruba derived Lukumi system. They have the gods of thunder and the trees and the sky and the wind. I said that that just seemed natural to me, of course. So as I got into this, I eventually was initiated, and I learned that when you're initiated into one of these groups, it's like a school, like in the ancient Greek system. It's an initiation school, and you start learning. So one of the things I learned is that the rites are filled with symbols, and these symbols have meanings, and most people have no idea what they mean. That's the whole thing is, well, what does the plantain represent? You know, what does the bamboo stick represent? Who knows? But I was curious, and I kept learning, and it eventually led me back to Africa to understand the sources of these cultures in Cuba. So that's how I ended up going to Nigeria in 2004. I was initiated in the Leopard Society in Nigeria, because the elders there recognized that what I was bringing from Cuba was part of their own heritage. So I think it's pretty clear from what I've told you that I like to work with the grassroots. I do have a PhD in performance studies from Northwestern University after getting the master's with Yale with Thompson at Yale. But I've been kind of an independent researcher forever. I've worked at the University of Calabar in Nigeria for 15 years. Nigerians were really good to me. I mean, I've always had a great time with the Cubans. They're so welcoming. The Nigerians, the Cameroonians, very welcoming people, and they're also interested to learn about each other because they had no way of knowing about each other. They said that is, the West Africans didn't understand their heritage in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean people didn't have contact with the African people, and so on and so on. So it's a very interesting educational kind of journey, and that's what I think of it. Because if I'm asked what I believe in, I would say I believe in education above all. I come from a family of educators, and I think that the education, the transformation that's enabled by education is one of the most powerful that I've seen in the world. So, but I do have a lot of faith in these African systems, and they're often described as religions, but I think that they are, I think people use the term religion indiscriminately. And often in Cuba, that it's a way of protecting themselves, like, leave us alone, we're doing our religion. It's kind of a protective shield, but in fact, what these systems are doing are they're maintaining historical narratives of the people who were enslaved. And this is the way that they talk about their own history. As people who they don't like how they're described in the educational systems as being slaves, basically work animals with no history. They have their own historical narratives, which are inside these systems. And unless you enter, you can't find out. So I said, what the heck, let me find out. And that's what I've been doing for 30 years. So please interrupt me at any time. I'm just going to hang out and show you some photos. Okay. I learned from my brother, who's an IT guy, that it's kind of interesting when you start a presentation to show, 4 or 5 different things about where you're going with the presentation. That's what I've done here. On the top left is my initiation in Nigeria. Top right is a masquerade from the Leopard Society in Cameroon. Bottom right is an elder I learned from in Havana, Cuba, who taught me the story of his own family, and they come from the Calabar region of Nigeria, and how his ancestors recreated this leopard society in Havana as a mutual aid system. But the reason the photo is so cool is that he's reading an essay written about his culture. So that was another one of my methodologies. I'm going to share what's written about these people with them and get their critiques. You know, this is good, this isn't good. That's the, how else do you find out? And so there he is. And that man, Andres, his photograph is in my room right here. I worked with him for 7 years, and it was like he was waiting for me to come to tell the story. And then bottom left is a painting by a guy named Doze, D-O-Z-E, who was one of the most interesting self-trained artists from the so-called hip-hop movement that emerged in New York in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Doze was originally a dancer, but he became a painter, and he's still painting. And this is a wonderful triptych that kind of gives you an idea of the brilliance of these young painters and how they're using codes to speak about their reality. So some of you might know this stuff better than I do, okay? So chip in. On the left, it said 72. You see a crown and then an Orthodox Christian symbol, right? So there's something about ancient Christianity there. They're a holy people. In the center, you see a little black head in the bottom, protege, protect yourself. That's Elegua, the god of the crossroads in the Yoruba Lukumi system, which is, you know, kind of a Janus head, like in the Roman system. And then you see there's a small guy with a Masonic outfit on, so it's the Freemasons, mutual aid. And then on the right, you see a cockroach with the Orthodox crucifix on its back, and the cockroach represents the people who are, you know, the suffering masses who are in the cities of the world. So he's saying the cockroaches we are holy people. And you see the funny little toilet paper that says El Mas Duro Duro, where, you know, you've got to be hard to survive, must be strong. And it says resilient, but above that, 7H520. Well, he's riffing. It's being very playful, and he's riffing on the 5 Percenters, which was a group from New York City, like the Black revolutionaries of the 80s, maybe, or 70s, and they were redesigning the alphabet. It's all about the language is being used to oppress us, so we're going to switch it around to liberate ourselves. So here, the 7 is the 7th letter of the alphabet, which is G, GH. The 5th letter is E, and then is it the 20th is T? Is that right? Ghetto resilient. So that's just a kind of cool way to show that in this presentation, everything is about codes. Because in my initiation, I'm being painted with codes on my body. The masquerade is a coded masquerade. It's a form of literature that it's actually, and you know, so this idea of literacy is so interesting. In Africa, there is an indigenous literacy. It's not with the Roman alphabet, but they do have a way of communicating with signs, which is what I've been trying to learn about for many years. Any questions?
Yeah, Ivor, can I ask you? Oops,
Yeah.
Can I ask you about the Freemason image again?
Sure. This is in my book, Aerosol Kingdom. So, yeah. Well, you know, I don't know what to tell you except that they're saying that we have groups to protect ourselves. We have solidarity. We help each other survive in the midst of.
So they're relating to the Freemasons in a positive way in that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the codes. You know that all these groups have mythology. Whether how historically accurate they are, that's something that a lot of people spend a lot of time with. But you see the key next to the cockroach on the far right. that is showing that that's the key of St. Peter. We have the key of knowledge. Knowledge is the key to unlock who we are. If you don't know who we are, you can't understand our codes. So it's a very protective kind of, they're saying we have a lot of material, but we're not going to give it to you easily, you know. So, and, you know, it's so interesting to me because I started with this kind of passion for the painters in New York, ended up going to Cuba where they have lots of, so you can see the signs written on the paper that Andres is reading on the bottom right. These are coded signs that come from Nigeria. So it's so interesting to me how all the things I've been doing for the past 30 years are related in kind of theoretical ways. There's a historical continuity, and it's related to the codes that are being used, which are not the codes of mainstream industrial complex, capitalist industrial complex, let's say. So let's see a couple slides, please. Next slide. And this is just a map from a wonderful book, a wonderful atlas, just showing the movement of people, the largest forced migration on the planet. And these are the people going into Cuba. So you're getting people from all over Africa at different times. And the interesting thing with Cuba is that it was after the Haitian Revolution. The Cuban opportunists started to create huge sugar plantations because they were gone in Haiti, and Cuba became one of the greatest sugar colonies in the world. And that was from the 1790s until the 1850s. Thousands and thousands of Africans were brought in. And that's why the culture in Cuba is so much more easily to relate to Africa than in other places where they were there much earlier. And their languages got more watered down or creolized, or however you want to say it. In Cuba, they speak 3 ritual languages, which are the Lukumi from the Yoruba, the Cross River from Calabar, which is what I study most, and the Congo. Next slide, please. And so that makes Cuba is a totally different reality than the US. And I'm sure a lot of you know this, but it's really, it really is a different world. And the only way I've learned about this is by getting initiated and working with these elders, a lot of whose knowledge comes from within their own families. And what I do is what Fernando Ortiz did. Fernando Ortiz was the great Cuban scholar who did a lot of lecture demos, and he would present drummers to the Cuban population and say, here's what they do, here's what they sing. I bring together people who are artists, and these are Cubans and Nigerians in Paris. We were invited to the Musée Quai Branly, which was a great honor, and they did 4 days of shows. They don't speak the same languages, they don't speak the same colonial languages, but they interacted perfectly based on their indigenous signs and language too. So there are the Cubans and Nigerians hugging each other. It was a really beautiful moment. Next slide, please. I don't have the video hooked up to show you, but this was one of the Cubans who's chanting, and the masquerade is dancing. And when the masquerade is dancing, it's dancing signs, which are known by the initiates. Next slide. And as a result of that event in Paris, the Cubans presented a CD recording called Yeneson Kama. And it's so fascinating because, I'm the scholar, right? But the Cubans are also the scholars. They're studying their own heritage, and they know a lot more about this than I do. And this CD was released based on what they had learned with meeting the Nigerians in Paris in 2007. So that was amazing, But they're also doing this in codes. They're not saying, hey, look at what we learned. They're expressing it through hidden codes. So unless they had, if they hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known, right? Next slide, please. And then this is the, for the launching of that CD in New York in 2009, a bunch of Cameroonians came up from Washington. There's a large Cameroonian community there. And they're also initiates of this Ekpe Leopard Society. So we had a heck of a lot of fun. And you know, it's just amazing how these encounters are happening in the USA, because everyone is here. Parts of every culture are here. And next slide, please. And so we're all still working together. Then my book came out 2009, which took me 15 years to write because it was based on a lot of oral history in Cuba, which I had to translate back and forth. And another method of mine is to share my work with the people who I'm writing about before I actually publish it, so they can help me get it right. Incredibly difficult to do, but it really saved me from a lot of embarrassment too. So I was cautioned about eliminating certain things, and I'm now very proud of this book. I got no worries. It was published 2 years later in Nigeria by the federal government for the Nigerians, so the Nigerians can get a copy of it. And now look at the cover on the right. You know, I showed this to Robert Farris Thompson, and that guy was like, had this genius of just looking at something and capturing what it was, which I don't have. And he told me, oh my God, that's not a river. That river is not a river, that's a sign. So in fact, the paintings themselves are signs about what's going on in the spirit world, or the world of the ancestors. So what does it mean? You've got the leopard, which is, you can see that the leopard is grabbing a human being, which is showing the judicial power of the society, because it's the original police force of the people of that part of the world. So now you see a boat and a river. Now in the Congo system, you've got the Kalunga line, which is just the top of the water, which divides the world of the living above and the world of the dead below. The dead are inside the water or in the land. And so this is a river representing the spirits of the dead who are coming and shining their brilliance as the sun. And the sun actually represents a sonic force, which is the voice. The voice of the leopard is being presented as the sun shining, but it's actually vibrating air. So, and then, okay, that's really colorful and wonderful. So what? This has everything to do with the liberation of Cuba from Spain and the wars of independence. And this is stuff that is completely hidden from the official historiography, right? Because what do professional historians do? They go to the archives. Who made the archives? The dominant class. So the people who actually fought the wars, 70% Africans were in those armies. And they were using their African culture for protection and so on. So this is a painting by a guy from a African derived family in Cuba about the wars of independence. You can see there's a priest called a Tata. A Tata is his father, Tatankisi. In the Congo thing, he's got a leopard skin around him, and he's in a trance, and he's summoning the spirit from the iron pot there, and a leopard spirit is coming out with the saber raised high. The saber, if you can see it well, it has markings on it. It has, you know, ritual signs on it too. So it's got this ancestral energy coming from Africa to come and help the warriors fight the Spaniards, basically. And these are narrations of the Cuban people about their own history, which are totally erased in the Department of History in the University of Havana, for example. You know, so this stuff is really rich and amazing, powerful, and it's kept alive through generations of initiates in these esoteric schools of knowledge, and it's all alive within Cuban popular music, which I happen to love. I love to dance, and and the lyrics are all codes about this history. So fascinating. I just learned something today. I was talking to a Spanish colleague who works in Equatorial Guinea, which is a Spanish Spanish-speaking colony in Africa. There is no Department of Latin American Studies in Spain. There's no Department of Latin American, can you imagine that? What is going on there? There's no Department of African Studies in Spain. I mean, that's just incredible to contemplate. Real disconnection. So, so what I'm saying is that there isn't any commitment to this knowledge on the part of the Iberian people. In fact, there's a commitment to erasing it. So that's interesting in terms of education. How is it possible that a lot of our history, we don't even know what it is? That's kind of dangerous. So this is what the Raoul Peck is, investigating, and I've been watching it. It's been one, to me, that stuff it's hard to watch, but it's also, this is what I always knew. I mean, it's not surprising, but it's amazing to see it put on public TV. And a lot of the work that I do is in recognition of that history, but we're looking at the other side of the story, at the very positive stuff, the amazing ability of the African and especially the African descendants to maintain their historical narratives on their own, in very surprising ways, which don't make linear sense often, So to me, as a historian, that's fascinating. But and I wrote an essay a few years ago, which, if any of you want to check it out, I'm really happy about it. It's about Aponte. Aponte was an African descendant in Havana who had created the first movement for abolition and independence. There were white people who fought for independence but not abolition, but he did both. He was executed in 1812, and I write about his legacy, which I learned about from the Cuban initiation systems. But in this essay, I go way deep into talking about the problem of archives. How are archives created? Why are they, why they don't tell us everything? And there are other types of archives which are very important, which, of course, oral history, and so on and so on. And of course, the professional historians aren't trained to do oral history, so it's kind of like they don't even go there most of the time. Mm-hmm. So,
Ivor,
yeah.
sorry, but
Mm-hmm.
where do we find that essay?
I have a web page, Afro-Cuba Web. If you look up my name, Ivor Miller, and Afro-Cuba Web, one word,
Okay.
you'll get. I put up a lot of my publications so you can just download them.
Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another way how we're being subversive. We're putting everything up online for free, even if sometimes I don't have the full permission to do that. We do it anyway. No one said no yet, because we want to be read, and we want people to have access to the information. Next slide, please. I should probably go faster now that most of the, okay, so here I'm in Cameroon, right? What am I doing in Cameroon? I was in Nigeria, wasn't I? Well, I heard about, through an email, there was a guy called Nasako who was protecting the rainforest or something. I said, my God, Nasako is a title in Cuba. So I write to him, I don't hear back. I write back another year later, I write back, and finally, because email is really hard in Africa. So he wrote back and he said, oh my God, Nasako is in Cuba. They organized a family festival based on that knowledge. And it's just an amazing story, because this family used to live on the coast, and because of slave trade, they ran into the mountains where they still live today. And they told me their history, through the oral tradition. And so I presented my book at this event. And next slide, please. This must have been in 2011 or 12, yeah. And so one thing I learned in Africa, who cares what you say? if a white man comes and gives a long talk, they're like, yeah, we've heard that before. Meanwhile, you're stealing from us, you're raping our women, so so what I did is I just come out dancing. Next slide. So when you come out dancing, they love that. You can see that people are smiling back there. Next slide. And you don't have to say anything. So that's interesting, because I had studied with Pearl Primus. Pearl Primus was a Black Trinidadian in New York who did a lot of stuff about dance and diplomacy, and it's just so amazing, because when you're dealing with populations that have been suffering colonization for hundreds of years, they're like, oh my God, here comes another white guy. Forget all that crap, just dance, and then everyone's going to be happy. Next. And then what did they do? They consulted the ancestors. So in that basket, we're in the middle of the patio, we're way out in the wood, we're way up in the mountains. There's no electricity up there. This is the ancestral home. Most of the people have to go to the cities to earn their livings, but this is the ancestral home. They throw some shells on the ground, which is divination. Ancestors say, yes, you're doing a good thing. And so we have the event. So through this kind of thing, somewhere I read this, but I cannot remember where it was, but what is the concept of a community in this part of the world? This part of the world, the community are the living people. And, of course, we're seeing patriarchy here. These are all men, male heads of lineages. So they're usually the eldest person representing their forefathers. But the women have their groups too. Believe me, the women have a lot of power. It's not always public power, but that's another story. The community is the living people. It's the ancestors in the land with whom they communicate. And it's the land itself. So that's the tripart community, the people, the ancestors, and the land. They all go together. As soon as you remove people from their land, you destroy their community and their access to food, of course. So much of the Raoul Peck stuff is about removing people from their land or stealing their land, killing the people and all that. So what is so amazing that I've learned and that I continue to be amazed with every day is that I'm learning from these Cuban systems that they have recreated this community in Cuba even after slavery. That's amazing. And how do they do that? Well, it's a long story, but I'm writing about this. I got stuff coming out on this, but because when I grew up in the US, we heard, Black people have no connection with Africa. Don't talk about it, forget it. Everyone's assimilated. Well, that's not, in the Caribbean, that's totally not true. It's a whole different picture. And you don't have to be dark-skinned Black either. You can look like I do and be African culturally. And that's really amazing too. Next slide. So more dance. These red things are protective devices. So that's why, and there's an elder woman who makes them, and somehow they are blessed by ancestral energy. And next slide. Okay, so this is Eno Washington, the guy who trained me as a dancer when I was a young student, and he was getting an MFA at Smith College. There's a video, I have a YouTube channel, Ivor Miller on YouTube, and this is called Dance on the Wind. So you can, we did a video about him. It's, I made it on a shoestring, but it's a beautiful thing about his journey and his relationship to dance and Africa and being in the US. So recommend watching that. Next slide. And Eno is a rare person who can speak as well as he can dance. Very articulate human being. So here's the book Aerosol Kingdom. based on oral history. And this is Vulcan on the cover, who the title comes from his painting. And above where it says Aerosol Kingdom, there's another couple of lines. Those lines are actually text, which he has written in a camouflaged way. So they're ineligible unless you know the codes. So I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. This guy is Cherokee. Vulcan is Cherokee and African American. And so when I did this work, I was asking people, some of them got kind of annoyed, but where are you from? What's your background? And just by doing that, I began to learn so much about my own history, my own local history, and also what is hip hop has been so co-opted by companies, but also by academics who want to say, oh, it's a Black thing, it's a Black male thing. I say that's not true at all, because I know these guys. There were people who were descendants of the Puritans who were in the subways painting. There were women from Ecuador. There were Chinese. And so this book gets into how these young people created multicolored groups based on talent. We don't care what you look like, what can you do? That's the same way jazz was created in New Orleans, a century ago. So there's something going on here about American, so I get into that in this book. And I think the book, I'm very proud of this book because it's the people talking about their own selves. And I think the book will have a long life, but it was totally ignored by academics because you've got the Department of Black Studies or this studies or that studies, and this book doesn't fit in there, Next slide, please. Okay, so there's the Does Get a Resilient. Next slide. These two women are part of a group, a family group. So the Africans came, they were enslaved and brought to Cuba. They reorganized themselves into what are known as cabildos, which are also called nation groups. And so the woman on the far left is Teresa, and she's the elder, and that's her daughter. And on the far right is Cha-Cha, one of the great Bata drummers. Bata is a double-headed twin drum from the Yoruba people. When I'm writing a book on that for many years. So it's this idea that the Africans reorganized themselves into groups that they created based on their ideas. So at this point in my work, I'm describing Africans as pioneers of American societies alongside the Puritans and conquistadores, which it just seems obvious, but it's kind of a radical move given what I was taught in school. It's like, what do you mean Africans are founders? My God, they created all these societies, at least in Cuba, which I know best, and in Haiti, and in New Orleans too, that are still with us, which are part of our societies. But because they're put in the religion category, they're kind of like, they're treated as, oh, Black people are so religious, they just can't help it. But these are actually political societies and mutual aid societies. And fundamental to the consciousness of Cuban people and the arts of Cuba, the music, which is now a global thing. Next slide. Then I met Wande Abimbola as a student when I was in Hampshire College. He was at Amherst College for a minute, and I met him there. And then years later, we were living in the same collective house in Cambridge. I started asking him questions about Cuba. I had been to Cuba, I'd been initiated. I started asking him questions, and he said, we should do a book, and we did. So this is kind of a dialogue between Wande and I about Yoruba heritage, particularly in Cuba. And this book was very important to Cubans who have trying to learn about their own heritage because they didn't have contact with Africa. The Cuban Revolution separated, except for military interventions in Angola, the Cubans didn't have contact with their African sources. So Next slide. And so this is, I'm with Frank Cabrera, who created the group Ile Tuntun. Ile means house and Tuntun means new, or the new land. And so they're describing the Yoruba heritage in Cuba as this is the new land. We're extensions of West Africa. And Frank was one of those who, he's got the red cap, the white and red cap on. He comes from an ancestral line of Babalaos, who are diviners of the oracle in the Ifa system, which I'm sure a lot of you know about Ifa, something about Ifa. It's got 250 signs. It's can be compared to the I Ching, perhaps, and it's very deep in Cuban consciousness. So the book by Wande Bimbola helped create things like Ile Tuntun, which are now all over the Americas, and they're exploring their African heritage. Next slide. And based on that book, this is a banner, and you can see that's Elegua, the god of the crossroads, and the, whose colors are red and black. The Janus head. He's like the god of negotiations. When you enter a crossroads, you've got to negotiate. You got to think about where you're going, and you have to, look both ways and all that stuff. But this person, this was created, it's got the date of 2000. That's after our book was published in 1999. Ayan Oga Ilu. So that's the Nigerian spelling. Ayan, which is the god of the drum. So this is a banner for a sacred drum. And what I'm showing this because he has changed the spelling from the Cuban way to the Yoruba way in Africa based on our book. So our book actually began to influence people in the culture itself, and that was kind of amazing. Actually, linguistically, it's pronounced exactly the same way. Anya, anya. Yeah. So anyway, it's a curious note, but since language is really the deepest part of human culture in many ways, the fact that the Cubans have a language that comes from Africa is so important to what they're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, there's Andres, the man I learned from for 7 years in Havana. And he's in front of a huge mahogany door in old Havana. These are, when the Spanish first arrived, Cuba was a complete forest of mahogany. It's now got like, I don't know, 25% of that forest is still there because it was all cut down for sugar. But if you go to southern Spain, which I have, a lot of the churches have mahogany doors from Cuba, and the pews and all the, like in Cordoba, in the incredible woodwork inside there, it's all Caribbean wood. So there's Andres, and he's holding a staff and he's wearing a cap. And I didn't know what that really meant until I went to Africa. Oh my God. He's claiming that he's a title holder in the society because only title holders are allowed to have a cap and a staff. So that was kind of interesting. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so here I am recording Andres. I put up videos of him on my YouTube channel. Of course, they're in Spanish, but they're fascinating to look at. He was the grandchild of an African who came enslaved and was telling me the story, which became the book Voice of the Leopard. Next slide, please. And there he is critiquing what's been written. Yeah, my teacher in Cuba, who is the founder of the National Folklore Troupe, has told me I have to write a book about Andres, or him only, and his ideas. Kind of like the book on the Dogon Griot. There's a book on the Dogon elder, and the Dogon cosmology and how one person can create an entire world in his head. Next slide. And so this is a song sung by the Cubans about where they come from. So this is part of the oral history archive. It's reproduced in rituals. Okobyo, okobyo inieneson, Awanabe Korabendo, Nunque, Itia Ororo Kande, Efike Beton, O Ekwe. So what they're saying is our African brothers from the holy place came to Havana and they created the first lodge, We Greet Ekpe. And I published this around 2000 or something, and some guy from Nigeria wrote to me and said, I understand this. So this started a whole thing about talking to the Africans based on the inherited traditions of Cubans. And I got a lot of flack from academics who are very highly positioned saying, you know, this is not possible, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, professionally, I'm in a lot of trouble. But in terms of the grassroots, I continue to learn, and we're in continual dialogue. And, you know, we're learning all the time from the unofficial grassroots people who, for them, this stuff is necessary for their own heritage, because through colonial system, through the modern governance, through the, you know, the what's happening in Africa, which is so heavy, they've lost so much of their culture, and they're wanting to get back what they can to try to bring balance back into their lives. Next slide. And so based on that translation of that song, I was invited to bring a Cuban group to a meeting in Brooklyn, New York in 2001. And there they are presenting to not just Africans, but people of Calabar, where this culture is from. Next slide. And then in 2004, I went to Nigeria. I was initiated immediately by the Calabar people because they recognized the content of the Cuban stuff was so deeply involved with their own heritage. And the governor of the state invited us back. And I'm sitting right there with two Cubans dressed in white who are like amazed at me chanting at a cultural event. Next slide. And so here we are in Nigeria with the elders of the Ekpe Leopard Society. And you know, the people of this part of Nigeria are living on the same land their ancestors did for hundreds of years. It's one of the few places that were not displaced by colonialism in Africa. So it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting place. And when you live on land that you've been on for hundreds of years, it's a whole different psychology, your relationship to the land itself and all that. Next slide. And so then I started traveling around the entire area as an initiate. I have the privilege of going anywhere where the Leopard Society is and talking to the elders. And so that's what I've been doing, you know, for 15 years in Africa. Next slide. Up into the villages. And here I'm working with a linguist. This is Professor Margaret Okon. She was trained in the Sorbonne, and she's an Ibibio-speaking linguist. And we are documenting songs. And we actually just published a paper. I can send that to you guys if you're interested. But you know, we're doing it like people study ancient Greek. You get the original language, and then you get the literal translation, and then you get the poetic translation. And all this is because the Cuban Abakua songs are so powerful and long. I thought, well, what are the songs like in Africa? What's the relationship? And there is quite an interesting relationship. Next slide. And so the two guys, the two men on the left went with me to Paris in 2007. They're very knowledgeable people. You know, one guy's a fisherman and the other guy, I'm not sure what he did, but it's funny how my teachers in Africa were not at the university because the people in the university are alienated from their culture. They're afraid of their villages. They think, you know, because it's complicated, but my teachers were peasants who had great status within the ancestral heritage. And that's Margaret, the linguist. Next slide. Yeah, here we are at a very rural village recording songs. Next slide. Yep, next slide. More, you know, lots of good parties, lots of fun. every 7 years in this rural village, the voice of the leopard escapes. It's part of a ritual cycle. And so the whole village tries to get it back. And how do they encourage it back? You know, it's a male society, but it turns out that women, if women are not involved, the leopard does not come back. Next slide. Let's see. So it turns into a whole community carnival of, they've got all these colorful things to entice the leopard back. Next slide. Can you get it?
Yeah, sure. Ivor, I want to jump
Yeah.
in real quickly and just say, we'll ask two questions. Talk about
Yeah.
the staffs here and what they're
Yeah.
signifying.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Well, what I was explained is that, you know, this is a 7-year cycle, right? Ekpe is the government of the people, and when the voice leaves, there is no government, so they got to get it back. And these staffs are colorful things to have fun and make the leopard want to come back. It's meant to be enticement, so it's carnivalesque in that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, second question is, what are folks hoping to receive from the voice of the leopard?
That means, well, the voice means that they are an autonomous people, that no one is above them, that no one can lord it over them. And that's why this stuff was so, it was, in Cuba, the Spanish government tried to stop this by any means, and they couldn't, because it means we don't recognize the Spanish government. We have our own government. So I think that's, yeah.
No, it's very interesting. I just remember that these kind of staffs, you see a version of that, like when every time you go to like Jazz Fest in New Orleans, people waving these things around. It's another version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The staff, a very simple thing, has a lot of symbolism, but as I've learned in other parts of Nigeria, the staff seems to mean that I'm a branch from the tree of my lineage. I'm a stem from the tree. I'm connected to my history and my ancestry.
Wow. Yeah. Cool. All right, next slide.
Yeah, and here we are recording songs in a different village. And so here we're really looking at the song as a conveyor of history and philosophy or something. And in every village is a different language, very complicated area. Next slide. Yeah, that's a friend that's the guy who brought us to Paris in 2007. He came down and visited me, got initiated, and but no one's ever done field work in this area. So whatever the little we do is something, it's a contribution. Yeah, next slide. And here I am meeting one of the chiefs of a very important town, very traditional town. You see how you can see that I've removed my cap and I'm barefoot. When you meet a chief like that, that's what you got to do. And then I'm offering him my hands and he's blowing into them. Because he's a representative of the powerful ancestors, and his voice energy is a blessing. And if you think about just you and I here today, this all relates to just being a human being. We have a voice. We have power in our breath. I mean, this stuff is not so exotic and distant from any human being in the world. We all have a voice, and our voice can have power if we learn how to harness it, right? So I find it it's so interesting to demystify a lot of this stuff, because it actually makes a lot of sense. Who has a voice? Who doesn't? If you have a voice, you're autonomous. Next slide. By the way, that's the community in the last slide that Daryl Ford wrote about in a very famous anthropological book called Yakor Studies, which I just finished reading. It's a brilliant study. So I'm at the University of Calabar. The guy sitting next to me is the president of the university. And he just became president, and he's kind of a man of the people who likes his culture. He's one of the few educated people who's very comfortable with his traditional culture. So I invited him for dinner. and he brought a cultural troupe. The woman next to me is a filmmaker from New York that I invited to come and help me document stuff. And, you know, we just had a great time. And so the Nigerians have been very welcoming to me, and I've been very good to them. And that's how I did fieldwork there for, you know, over 15 years. I finally got out. It's getting way too dangerous. But what an amazing experience that was to work with the university and the villagers. Yeah, next slide. And then based on that, I went to Cuba, announcing myself as an initiate from Calabar. And these are all elders of the Abakua Society they're all very famous musicians, by the way, if you know the rumba tradition. That's really cream of the cream. And so I've been going back and forth for many years like this, bringing information to each group. And, you know, this is what Pierre Verger did. If you guys know Pierre Verger, the French photographer who lived in Salvador, Brazil for many years, he was initiated in West Africa as an Ifa priest. And his works, I mean, to me, he's my patron saint. He's the guy. And there's a movie made by Gilberto Gil about him called Messenger of the Gods, which is an absolute must-see. You got to see this film. Gilberto Gil is a pop music guy who became the minister of culture in Brazil when they had a liberal government, and he made the film about Verger as the minister of culture. And it's an amazing document, artistically and in every way. It's just an amazing film. And it's done, you know, it's done in like at least 5 different languages. So, and I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. Yeah. Next slide. Okay. So now, the dark-skinned guy on the left is Reynaldo Brito. He is, like Andres, my teacher, he was from an African family. And this guy he passed away 2 years ago. And he was one of the incredible masters of knowledge of the Calabar, Congo, Yoruba traditions in Cuba. And this guy kept manuscripts. So this is, you know, the whole thing about archives. The Africans in Cuba have kept their own archives. And people in the government don't know those, they don't know about the archives. I mean, so they're using the tools of the European tools, which is writing in books, to keep their own history. And these things are not, they are kept within families and they're hidden. And so the guy on the right is one of my teachers in Cuba. And we're going to meet this person. And it's a long story, but this guy is a treasure. Next slide, please. And you can see he's got an old manuscript book. It's like a bank ledger from 100 years ago. And he has got a song written down there. And the elder got 2 spoons in his hand and he's beating a rhythm and he's singing the song and teaching through the manuscript. So this is not really an oral history. It's not really an oral tradition. It's been written down, which is why it's so stable. So this is the thing that, oh, it's oral tradition. That can't last long. True. They've written it down. And if you prove yourself a worthy student, the teacher will share with you. So, you know, the African hierarchy of, and not only African, it's a worldwide thing, respect for the elders. If you don't respect your elders, they're not going to teach you anything. You know. And one day Abimbula, the Nigerian guy, told me, you know, when the student is ready, the master will teach. So as we think about cultures in the world today, you know, a lot of discussion about young people don't know anything, you know. But those who want to learn can actually learn from the elders. And I see this, and I continue to, even though I'm almost an elder myself, I keep learning from elders, and it's such a powerful thing. So that, I think this photo is a beautiful encapsulation of how African culture has been transmitted over centuries in Cuba. Pretty amazing. Next slide. Yeah, there they go. Yeah. And, you can see on his wall, there's a double-headed axe there. That's the sign of Shango, the thunder god, who's the king of twins, the father of twins. Next slide. And so I was a senior fellow in the National Museum in Washington of African Art in 2012. And every time I gave a performance, I brought all the Ekpe people of the area. And I mean, they'd never seen anything like this. Usually it's a single scholar talking about some object. We just did a whole performance, and the Cubans came down, and really amazing stuff. I think one of those is online on my YouTube channel. Next slide. Okay, so now you guys kind of know how I do what I do. And I've probably been speaking for a while. I don't know. Why don't I hear from someone else?
Well, I want to just jump in, and
Yeah.
we can open a discussion at this point. But I want to say thank you so much for showing us all of these, this incredible mosaic of research that you've developed over the years. It's a really wonderful. It's a wonderful just body of research and an archive that you yourself have developed over the years that I think is incredible to see. So thank you for showing that to us. Just for those who maybe don't know, and probably there are those who don't, how would you define Cuban Abakua?
Okay. Well, it's commonly referred to as a secret society, whatever that means, because it's publicly known. What society doesn't have secrets? Every society has secrets. So it's really a mutual aid. It's a group for mutual aid.
Yeah.
And I mean that's, but all the African groups are mutual aid societies. They're but this particular one is male. And when you study Cuban economic history, you learn that there were very few jobs. Job was very competitive. So people who joined the lodge some of the lodges had access to work at a certain factory, or butcher shop, or stevedore. A lot of them were stevedores on the docks. And when that person in the family worked, the whole family ate. So the women in the family were very supportive of it. It's a very misunderstood phenomenon. They've been accused of everything, like being anti-feminine, by being murderers and bloodletting savages and all that stuff, because the Spanish were so threatened by organized Black people who were not just living in chaos all the time. So there's a lot of problem with the historical literature on this group, which I have tried to resolve by learning about the African sources and the philosophies behind it. But yeah, it's mutual aid, and like everything else, it's about what are our values. The Abakua person is supposed to be a good friend, a good father, a good son, transparent, a good moral person. It's all of them teach that, just as the church do. Now, whether people actually do that is another story, but those are the teachings. Yeah.
I just want to point out for those of us in the FCCOL community, if you've ever walked upstairs in our hallway, going back the hallway toward the offices, you'll see all kinds of leopard prints, and you'll also see a painting that Carlene got years ago that depicts some of this stuff. And so when I encountered Ivor's work for the first time, I went, oh my God, this is already here. This is
Yeah.
already in our midst. We have this iconography around us.
Mm-hmm.
I've been passing it for years without delving into its meaning
Yeah.
or its depth. And I think that's a perfect metaphor for the kind of work that you're doing, Ivor.
Mhm.
You're exploring what's already all around us in ways that we might not even realize or
Yeah. So I was blessed with a fellowship in Holland. I was in Leiden, in the Netherlands, and I learned about a guy who had spent his life studying leopards. You know, some crazy philosopher type, and you know, for him the leopard was everything. But one of the things I learned from him is that some people see the leopard spots as related to the constellations in the sky. You know. So there's the idea of the cosmic leopard is in a lot of human societies, the jaguar in Mexico, the panther. And I saw a scientific documentary on leopards saying that the leopard is not as strong as the lion, but the leopard will beat the lion every time. Because its qualities, the leopard goes alone. When it sees it can't win a battle, it pulls back. I mean, it's a very intelligent animal. So all these things about the leopard are why it was chosen to be the totem of that society, because the elders are supposed to be cautious and wise and judicious and so on. So, you know, it's a fascinating study of the relationship of the West Africans to the land they were, you know, emerged from for thousands of years. So very cool stuff.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Ivor, can I ask a question? This might not be very eloquent, but
Okay.
you know, now we can move information across the Atlantic pretty well. But clearly for generations, what kept people strong was passed through the chain of ancestors. Am I right? And so the synchronicity that we find between what's happening now in Cuba and what's happening in West Africa is really a testimony to that chain of knowledge that comes somehow from the ether, from my ancestors, from my past. I think that's most beautiful to me. I want people to understand that our connection with everything that has been before us is vital to everything we are.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's so many ways to think about this stuff, but the Cubans talk about Mother Nature, all the, you know, this is in Mother Nature. So the main thing is respect for Mother Nature. Observe Mother Nature. We're part of that. And so that kind of humility and connection, it's probably found in a lot of deep world traditions as well. And this is idea that Mother Nature can also replenish your knowledge. Even if you do lose a connection or some information doesn't get transferred, Mother Nature is our teacher. And that's interesting too. Yeah.
Yeah, so early Christians were really threatened by the idea of information coming to us through the ancestors.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but it's in us. It's in our DNA, right? Ancestral information is within us. So like it or not, that's what we got.
Yeah, but I think that's a beautiful thing.
It is. Sure. Yes.
Other people, are there any folks that have questions or comments or things like that you want to throw out? If not, I have some stuff. Who's there?
Okay, so let me just keep talking for a sec and jump in someone else when you want.
Yeah.
So based on all this knowledge and based on all my readings of the Cuban literature, because I respect the Cuban literature a lot, I've learned a lot from it. I learned in Cuba that symbols, you know, when you look at a symbol and begin to study a symbol, it can help you understand a lot of things. So I've been working for many years on a book of symbols, a visual art book of symbols, which I'm, you know, reaching out to people who are designers to try to think about how we can put it together. But I thought I would show you some photos from one of the, I've got 57 chapters. Let me show you photos from one of the chapters, just to give you a little sense of the book. And this chapter is called, it's on the actual written symbols.
Is that the other file?
Yeah, Anafoto One. It's called Anafoto One, which is the name of a book about the symbols. But you know, Steve, you've looked at Veve quite a bit. This is the same kind of thing. Now, these symbols, there's a word for these symbols in Nigeria. And, you know, my teachers, because I always have good teachers, I find them and I learn from them. I like, this is all about codes. Okay, what's a code? A code can be a word. It can be a gesture. It can be a drum pattern, a beat. It can be a drawing on the floor or on a tree, or, you know, it can be a visual drawing. There's so many different ways that codes could be conveyed. And so this is just one way. Let's take a look.
All right, what am I showing here? Like this?
That's the last slide, I think. Try to go to the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, wait, to go to the begin. Wait.
That's our presentation. Yeah. Can you find the first slide there?
The very, very, very first slide of the whole thing?
Very, very, very. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I just showed you. That's the wrong file.
Oh, you want the other file, the second file that you sent?
The second file, yeah.
All right, this might take a little doing here. I'm sorry.
I got full faith in you.
You got this, Steve.
You got it. So yeah, what I'm trying to say to you guys is that I learned this stuff from the Cuban people. This whole methodology, I just learned it from people who weren't trained in universities or degrees or anything. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. And I just think that's so powerful, because we live in such a hierarchical society where, depending on your title, you're treated a certain way. And so here I am finding all these great teachers who are like janitors, you know, or fisher men and women, or dishwashers, you know what I mean? Yet they're like sages.
Yeah.
So I just think that's so powerful and refreshing and humbling too.
Yeah.
You know, because ultimately what I'm interested in is, who are we as a people? Who are we? I don't think we really know. Okay, there we go. So here's the beginning of the chapter. I got 4 different writing symbols. Upper left are young women in a Nigerian village during the Yam Festival. They're being painted on, and the signs are about their fertility. Upper right is a Cuban manuscript of these sacred signs from the Abakua Society. Lower right are signs from the same village where the girls are from. You know, you've got to be initiated to learn them. I was initiated to it. And the lower left is the sacred cloth of the Ekpe Society, which has sacred signs all over it. So let's take a look. Next slide. Okay, now this is a Cuban sign from published in a magazine, but it's a ritual signature. Each triangle represents a different person in the lodge, and they're doing a collective rite. And then I found this. This is an Egyptian mummy. The question of Egypt is so interesting and debated, but check out the kind of star design on the mummy itself. I've kind of got that, you know, the way the strips are it's kind of like a crossroads. Or it's the sign of the center of the Cuban one on the left. It's kind of the same design in the center where all the lines are meeting. So I don't know anything about the Egyptian thing, but I don't think anyone does, because we've lost contact. But there's a lot of really interesting things in Egypt to contemplate next. And I learned when I did go to Egypt, and I learned from some specialists there that the Egyptians brought leopards from the Congo region, and the priest who buried the pharaoh and initiated the next pharaoh wore leopard skin, and he was the only person to do that. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, this is an elder. This is a chief. Let's call him a lineage leader. He's the front of his own lineage. He's got signs all around his body, right? On the floor, on the bottom is the skin of a dukir, which is like an antelope. And the people of that region think these are sacred signs on the skin of the animal itself. So these are God-given signs. Then he's got all signs all around him. Next slide. And this is left in an African village with the dukir skin at the footstool and on the chair. Behind it is the palm frond sign, meaning a sacred space. On the right is a Cuban Abakua lodge with the goat skin with the signs, and then the signs above. And then, there's a Virgin Mary there. She is the patron saint of Cuba, but she represents, in my understanding, an African holy woman who's being represented by the church because it's a Catholic country. So these are just talking through codes. Yep. Next slide. These are ceramics from 500 years ago in Calabar, where there has been no archaeology ever done there. These kind of fell out of the road when they were digging for buildings, accidental archaeology. But look at the signs on these, especially on the left. You see the line, which is in Congo, the Kalunga line, which represents the top of the water. 2 eyes below for ancestors, 2 eyes above for people. Next slide. We see the same thing on a drum being performed today in Calabar. This is Ekpe. It's the crossroads. It's the 4 winds. It's a universal sign. Next slide. Yeah. And these are people in an Igbo-speaking area doing a funeral rite. The white chalk represents the moon. It's purity. It's kaolin. Kaolin comes from the riverbank, right? So this is so it's female energy, it's ancestral energy, it's the bones. Next slide. Here's an elder in Calabar. He is indicating signs. He's talking to a masquerade in sign languages, because the masquerades represent ancestors. They don't speak, they talk in sign language. And the mask is a sign. You notice that the mask has the colors red, white, and black, the same colors as a legua had in the Cuban stuff. So, all these colors are coded messages. Yeah. So next slide. Yeah. And then here's another elder. You see they're drumming signs, and then they're gesturing signs. So there's many levels of signs going on at the same time. The leaves held in the hand of the mask are also a sign, etc., etc. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide. And these are masquerades with signs on the back hats. One is left is a living masquerade. The right is a statue. But so there's something going on here. There's a lot of signs being communicated in lived everyday performance. What do they mean? This is the question. No? Next slide. And here's yet another masquerade, and this thing has kind of a winged hat. And so one of my teachers in Nigeria wrote a book. He was the first initiate of this group to ever write a book on it. And it's kind of a mystic, hard to read book, but he was trying to explain to the church, he was a Methodist, that everything that the Africans learned nothing new from the church that they didn't already know within their own traditions. But the church came with the idea that this is all savagery, get rid of it and do the church. And he's saying, no, we already had knowledge of life as a sacred thing through our own traditions. And if you open your mind, you can see that the teachings of the church are parallel to the teachings of our own traditions. Next slide. Yeah. So anyway, these are just, they're dancing signs. This circle represents the totality of the universe, just like a drum head, just like a Ifa tray, which is the oracle. The circle is the universe. Next slide. More signs. This is also, it's all Calabar. Next slide. Yeah, keep going. Here is the mask greeting a chief. You can see it's got the primary colors, yellow, white, and red on its back. That represents the tail of the leopard. Yeah, and the ostrich feathers represent energy of the air. Yeah. And the raffia represents energy of the forest. Next, so this stuff gets very mystic, because they believe that the teaching of Ekpe is basically that whatever you think can become reality. So a trained person is who's guiding the ceremonies has to be in a perfect state of purity and thinking positively, generating good positive ideas, which are then magnified by the drums and all this stuff they're doing. So that's, it's basically a scientific process. And I think every other tradition in the world says the same thing. Your thoughts, your ideas become what you say, and then they become your actions. And so you've got to be careful with your thoughts that you generate, right? Next slide. Keep going. Yeah, keep going. So they're greeting each other. Now this is an initiation in Calabar. You've got the red and the whites, right? The kaolin from the water, which is the moon, and the red is kind of the vital energy, the fire, the blood, the life force, and those two work together. The sun. Next slide.
I just want to point out that making sure I'm on. I just want to point out that I was reading about a slave revolt in New York City in the 18th century. Yeah, I want to say 1740 something. But when they began their revolt, they drew a circle on the ground on the sidewalk. And in order to begin the revolt, those who were going to take part in it had to enter the circle.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I think, there's clearly a relation there. I don't know exactly the relation, but.
And you can see on top of the slide, there's a young boy with his feet, and there's a white chalk mark on his feet who's being consecrated, and he's going to go in the circle and be initiated. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there he is. So he's a young prince, and now his eyes are being bound. So it's the idea that no one sees their own birth. When you're being reborn, you come into the world blind, right? Without seeing, and then you watch the birth of others, but you don't watch your own birth, sort of. Next slide. And then this is a rudimentary sign I saw during an Ekpe ceremony in Nigeria. Now in Cuba, the signs are much more elaborate and Baroque, which I can get into. Next slide. Yeah, there they are with the drums. Next slide. And these are documents from a book by Talbot, the first British officer who was in this part of the world, of the traditions of the women. These are women who are in coming of age rites, and they're being trained to be responsible leaders. And these designs convey some of that, which I can get into another time, but next slide.
The feather on the head, what's that doing?
Yeah, well, the feather, on the forehead, you see the overlapping signs like this, circles are meeting and overlapping.
Yeah.
The overlapping one is unity in a marriage, husband and wife.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know but you know, look at the on the right. Her hair is got 7 braids, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
7 is the sacred number of that area, that part of the
Yeah.
world. 7 is really important.
Yeah.
Next slide. Yeah. So, yeah, this is traditional literacy of that region. It's all gone now. People don't use it anymore at all. Yeah. Next slide. And this is a decorated fan. Actually, one of these is in Robert Ferris Thompson's book, because some of these are in museums in like Scotland. But this is in the home of my teacher in Calabar. Not made anymore, but these are decorative, made by women, and they do have some esoteric meanings too. Next slide. And keep going, please. And then the cap of the chief has signs on it too. Again, the colors of the 3 primary colors. Red for energy, white for cool and peace and the moon, and black is supposed to be a sign of potentiality. Like you have black earth, that you're growing in black, dark earth. It's very fertile, possibilities. Next slide. A lot of the signs come from nature, and so this is a tortoise with a sign for one of the titles. Next slide. Yeah, Equeñón. This is a title in Cuba. This is in a manuscript in Cuba, but when you see the belly of a crocodile, it's got this thing on it. And according to the myth, the crocodile wolf left a tail mark on the beach in the sand, and that was the first ritual sign. So it's this idea that the messages come from the spirit world, from the natural world, from the non-human world, so it's for us to be responsive to nature, because the crocodile is like the leopard of the water. It's the most fierce animal. The tortoise represents wisdom and longevity and slowness. You take cautious decisions. No. Next slide. And so in the New Yam Festival, which is the harvest festivals, in this village, an elder woman uses natural paints, which she creates from fruits, and she decorates the bodies, especially of the young girls, because they're supposed to grow up and be fertile and give children to increase the group. Next slide. Yeah, just keep going. So just it's here. Yeah, here she's showing some signs that have literal meanings. That's kind of union between a husband and wife. Next slide. And notice how the belly is circled, because the belly is the center of life, right? The baby drinks from the umbilical cord. So in fact, women themselves are sacred, because they're born being able to give birth. Men can't do that. So it's the idea that women are naturally sacred beings. Next slide. And next slide. Okay, now this is a women's group. In Nigeria, everyone has groups. So this is the women's group. They're probably all women who have given birth, and look at their bellies. They've all got signs on them. We're going to see a close-up of one. Next slide. There it is. So look at that. Perfect example of the woman as the center of the world. The umbilicus as the center of life. That's pretty cool, right?
That's cool.
So that's just amazing. Wow, that's the sun. The sun is giving birth to the world. Next slide. And then the chiefs have their own paint on them, but men in these cultures, men let blood, right? They sacrifice animals because women do it naturally. Women let blood naturally. So I read a wonderful anthropological study about this issue, looking worldwide at ritual, and it's always men that are letting blood. Women do it naturally. Women don't need to. Next slide. And look at see the feathers. You asked about the feathers. The man holding that staff with the feathers is showing his status. He is someone who has the ability to make the sacred voice of the leopard sound. Because the feathers are the sound, visualize the sound emitting out in space. Isn't that cool? That's pretty neat. Yeah. Next slide. You see, and all these men are in pretty good shape because they're farmers out there. You know, it's a rural culture. This is another rural village, and this man is teaching me sign language. You know, I'm in the process of getting initiated. So, you know, he puts a barrier across the road and I can't cross it unless I know how to undo the sign. Next slide. And so he's the apprentice responding. It's always a call and response with the sign. Next slide. And these are signs on the temple walls itself. And apparently, I'm told that women are the ones who paint these things. So it's a male society, but women have the knowledge to do the signs, which is interesting. Next slide. Yeah, just keep going. More show. Yeah.
So cool.
You see, there's a turtle. Looks like a turtle up there, or a chicken. I'm not sure. Yeah.
But it takes us right back to your subway art book.
Exactly. Yeah.
These are graffiti signs and
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like the one, okay, right there, just keep it there. The one on the far left on the bottom, that's like a crossroads. That represents a rattle. At least in Cuba, that represents a rattle that's used to summon the ancestors in the form of masks.
This right here?
Yeah, that one. Yep. Because the ancestors respond not so much to human voices, but mystic sounds. They follow the mystic sound that attracts them. Next slide. Yep. Next slide. Now he's showing the sign of a leopard, right? He's saying that we are dangerous because they're actually about to sacrifice a goat. A friend of mine is being initiated. So next slide. And that is one of his staff it's like a brush, a broom made of many different strands. Each strand represents a different family in the community. So he's supposed to watch, he's supposed to be responsible for all the families bound together. So this idea of solidarity is it's so much a part of the culture of this group, which is the Mutual Aid Society of Cuba. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, just keep going. Next slide. This is all from the same village. Yeah. And this is these signs are so prevalent in the Cuban rituals, and this is the only village I really found a lot of this stuff in. So which to me says so much has been lost in Africa itself. Next slide. Yeah. That's like a salamander or a crocodile. Next slide. And then these are Cuban manuscripts which document this knowledge. Yeah. And this is a Cuban lodge where they've got signs all over the back. Yep. And interesting, you see that, go back just a minute. This is really important for us in America, where we have so many issues with race. Look at the men here. They're all different colors.
Yeah.
You've got from white to dark, light skin to dark skin. They're all ritual brothers. Race is not an issue. Look at the two portraits on the wall. They're white guys, because the Africans realized if they were going to survive, they had to bring white people in. And this African culture became, I don't want to say raceless, it became inclusive. What's important is your moral quality, not what you look like. That's the issue. Yeah, next slide.
Just to pause there real quick, I think that's such an important and valuable insight.
For sure.
that you're, well, that the societies are bringing, but that you're sharing with us. I mean, I love the notion of what you talked about in terms of like ritual brotherhood or ritual bonding, ritual
Mhm.
that you transcend these kind of cultural and racial divisions through ritual, through initiation, if you will.
Right, right, because they're all reborn as brothers through the ritual mother, which is the voice of the leopard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most of these guys are working class people, but not. This transcends class as well. There's a lot of wealthy people who were brought in because they were good to their workers or something, you know. And so this transcends lots of things. And the gender issue is it's not as black and white as one might think. Women do have roles to play in this culture as well. But it being a male society. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, the Mother Nature. This is a sacred sign on a tree, which is a sacred tree. A tree which is sacred for the indigenous people of Central America too, the ceiba tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Next slide. And then this is a temple wall, and you see a sign there. Mm-hmm.
And Ivor, talk about this particular figure, the Irame.
Yeah. Well, it represents an ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
It's present. It's the same kind of mask that they have in Calabar, the same form. And it's holding a broom in its hand, which is used for purification and brushing. And the rooster is also used for purification, which I've seen used in Nigeria as well. I mean, it's an African tradition. Sometimes the roosters are sacrificed. Sometimes they're let go freely. Depends on the rite. But it's the idea that the ancestors are present with us in the rituals to make sure we're doing them correctly and that the continuity is, done faithfully. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's this idea, okay, so check it out. You can't see the full word, but it's Aniabon. Aniabon, which is the name of a land in Africa, in Calabar, right? So I said, what's the community? The living, the dead, and the land. So they're naming the land. You've got the ancestors there, and the living are doing the rituals. So the Cubans have recreated this incredibly, against all odds, recreated this African philosophy in their everyday life. Pretty impressive. Mm-hmm. And they are being marked on. You can see the guy's shirt, Uriabon Efi Brandi Masongo in 1843. That's the history of when that lodge was created. It's named after an African land. And they're marking them because through this ritual sign, they're in communication with the natural world, the spirit world, the ancestors. And when the initiates die, their bodies are also marked. So to tell the ancestors that an important person is coming in to join them. So the signs are not just decorations. They are things that do actual work, and they recreate and they communicate with different levels of reality. Yeah, there they are again, more signs. The Crossroads, yeah, the Kalunga line.
Yeah.
Keep going. And we saw that already, keep going, more signs. This is, each lodge has its own sign. On the top of this one, you see a little three feathers, and that's a boat. That boat represents the woman, the mother of the group. The princess in the mythology who found the leopard of the voice first. That represents her, and her spirit is imbued in everything in all the society's actions. So what the Abakua are actually doing are worshiping a woman, a spirit mother, a universal mother. And they're all sons of that mother, and they have to defend her. And so if you know the symbols, it's actually all about the women energy that gave birth to this group in the beginning. Next slide. Yeah, that's the symbol of one title holder who goes in that door. That's his place. Next slide. Yeah, and these are signs from a book, a manuscript in Cuba. look at the date there, 1845. So they're recreating things that were done by Africans and bringing them into the present.
Wow.
So yeah, Antiguos. Okay, this is a sign that was made for the creation of the first lodge by the Africans. So it says Antiguo Cementerio de Regla. That's the old cemetery of Regla. And what's happening is that you see the circle on the bottom. There's a direct line going up to a skull. So that is ancestral energy coming to the top into the realm of the living. So they're summoning the ancestors to authorize the creation of that lodge. That's how I read it anyway. Yeah, and then you've got the serpent, which is always a positive force. Serpent is a protective force in this culture. Yeah.
I can't really see, but it looks like the serpent's head is upside down, like his eye is on the bottom. Is that right?
I think it's the other way. I mean, I see a mouth opening on top.
Yeah, it's probably my glass.
It's not a great drawing, but you know, it's the serpent is a transmitter of energy. Yeah. Let's keep going. And this is a very rare photo of a lodge seal.
You want to eat dinner tonight?
Yeah. My mom was getting hungry. So this is it's got the Efi Mumban Koro, that's the name of the lodge. Yeah. And Efi is a lineage that comes from Calabar, so it's a particular lineage. And then this is all the sign of what happened during the creation of that group. So that it's a story, if you know how to read it. And it's done on a goat skin, which was the sacrificial goat. And what is the sacrifice representing? That we're giving something to the ancestors so that they give us something in return. We're asking for their authorization, for their support as we create this group. And so that blood spilled is part of that. And then the animal is eaten and it's a communal meal. There's always a communal meal sharing. Yeah.
Communion.
Next slide. Communion, for sure.
Yep.
Next slide. And then I went to the Nasako Festival in Cameroon, and they had these strange things like this white structure up there. And I don't really ask questions when I go. That's the temple right there. You see the temple, which is, yeah, that's it. Guess what? It's in the shape of a tortoise, because the people, the elders, are supposed to be wise like the tortoise and judicial and slow thinking, not hot-headed. And I showed this to a Cuban Abakua guy. He goes, "Oh my God, that's the same thing we have." And so that symbol on the right is the same kind of idea, at least according to him. That's the Nasako family, and you see it, that's the Nasako sign in Cuba. So he was awestruck by this. There's a lot to learn. But it was Pierre Vergier who said, when I'm in a ritual, I never ask them what they're doing. I just say, how can I help? And you participate, and by participating, you learn. Because when you say, "Hey, what's that? What's this?" You're exhibiting ignorance, and you don't really want to do that. You want to say, "Hey, let's join in, have fun," and later you'll learn little by little, right? Next slide. And this is a record by a Cuban drummer who is not an initiate. And this is Ignacio Berroa, who's in Miami right now, but he's a great drummer. He played with Dizzy Gillespie for a bunch of years. His first record, he's got Abakua signs on it. What does that mean? That means that even if you're not an initiate in Cuba, you identify with this as part of what it means to be a Cuban. These codes, these ritual signs. And he got this from Lady Cabrera's book, who's the great writer of this tradition, which I'm translating her work, even as we speak. But that's fascinating, isn't it? Well, you're not a member of this, but you identify, you defend it as your own because it's part of what it means to be Cuban. Africans who survived the slave trade and kept their culture alive. That's pretty intense. And that's very much a part of Cuban music. Next slide. And these are initiation signs on the bodies of people in Calabar. Let's keep going. We've been doing this so the more I collect a lot of old photographs. This is an initiation sign of a group in Cuba. Yeah, compared to the Tree of Life. Yeah, and these are diagrams from the book of my teacher in Calabar. Go to the next one. This kind of Kabbalah Tree of Life. The signs have speak to energies and planetary movements and stuff like that. So this is in the minds of the initiates. They're communicating with the cosmos through writing on the bodies. Pretty cool. Next slide. And then we've got the sign of, the ancient Greek sign of medicine, which is being related to, these are the names of titles in the Ekpe system. And these are the marks that are done on the body. So you can see where he's going. He's saying this is part of a universal system. It's not just some weird aberration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, the same type of thing. And then this is the sacred cloth that members are entitled to wear. You can see they've got a serpent in the middle and a rooster on the right, a turtle, a crocodile. The natural world is there. The blue represents the water. The white is the purity and the ancestors. So studying this stuff is very provocative, about all of humanity, not just Africa. But they have, the claim is that they've got insight into the human condition from their part of the world that's relevant to us all, should we choose to study it.
And it's maybe more and more relevant given the state of our ecological alienation.
Exactly. Well, that's my thought too.
Yeah.
Let's keep. Are there more to show?
Yeah, I think so.
And then these are paintings by Cuban modernist painters, and you can see the signs are coming through in the arts of the nation. And so, the marginal stuff of the enslaved blacks becomes kind of central to the expression of a national identity. That's pretty interesting. Next slide. Yep, another painting. This is a painting of, let's see. Okay, see there's a goat head in the very center of the painting. Mm-hmm. These are two triangles which represent the twin irames, the twin masquerades, which execute the goat in the ceremony. So, it's a modern painting based on the ritual. That's Cuba in a nutshell. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, that's the sign from the village. These are all the coded languages. Next slide. Yeah. And the cloth itself, behind which is the voice of the leopard. Yeah. And these are signs from Central Africa. Yeah. Done by, yeah, and these are signs. Yeah. This is a work by Gerhard Kubik, who's one of the great musicologists. Yeah, he's a totally awesome guy. Go to the next one. The next one are, these are human forms, but these are cement tombs in the Calabar region. And, it's amazing because they're so close to the Cuban sacred drawings because it's the same language. Because when the arrow goes up, you're going into the spirit world. You're dead. But when the arrow goes down, you're being initiated into the ground. You're being inserted into the ground. Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. Next slide. Yeah, this is a Cuban drawing on the right of the spirit leaving. It's a funerary. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just kind of playing around here and studying and contemplating what's in action here. Yeah, next slide. Yep, these are tombstones from the 1930s in this part of Nigeria. Most of them are being destroyed, and so I photograph whatever I can, because when roads come in, they're just gone. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, these are all things from Didi Cabrera's amazing book, Ana Foruana. Yeah. So look, I don't want to bore you guys. I think we should come to an end.
Well, we probably should come to an end, but at the same time, I'm so taken with all the stuff that you've shown. It is this gorgeous and just powerful world that I feel as though you have in your own way from afar begun to initiate us into this deep knowledge. And I know there's so much more to learn and to say, but man, I am so grateful that you've taken the time to do this.
Yeah, and I by showing you guys this, like I have, I've got 50 chapters of this stuff. Some are short, some are long, and it's reminding me how I really need the help of someone who's a professional designer to kind of how can these things go together to tell a story, because they're very complex. It does take you need to know something about it, and because a picture can't do all the work. You need a little text. It's an interesting problem, but a very exciting one, So that's my challenge. Well, and I love to work in collaboration. I'm a collaborative person. A lot of people don't know how to do that, but I like to, and I want to work with some kind of crazy designer to think through this and see how we could tell the story in an interesting, unusual way, and solid but unusual.
Well, let me just say, Ivor, meet Mary Tomasetti. Mary Tomasetti, meet
Okay,
Ivor.
Hey Mary. Hey.
You all should talk, and just see where it takes you. But it might be that there's a collaborative project that can take shape.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do want to bring this to a close. Are there any final questions before we sign off here from anybody?
Could you just show the last images there?
Yeah.
I haven't. Okay, yeah, these are. You see, this is an interesting thing because it's a sign for the first lodge of white people from the 1860s. Note that it's a Freemason triangle.
Yeah.
So some people in Cuba say Abakua is African masonry. That's how, because it's lodges, and so you can see through the symbols they're telling you who they are. We're white Freemasons who became part of this African society. That's pretty cool. Yeah. And these are lamellophones, which are beautiful instruments filled with these decorative. These are from Calabar itself, and they're in museum collections around the world. So the book also has a lot of stuff from museum collections. We're bringing all these things into conversation. Yeah. And when a lodge is born in Cuba, these instruments are very important because they're spirit instruments. Each key has a different spirit, and it's pretty amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Listen, no, thank you. You have just taken us to. Well, I was going to say taking us to school, but we're interested in the kind of knowledges that arise and that live outside of school. So thank you for all that you have offered us today. I'm just thrilled with all of this material, and I feel really, really drawn to it, and I hope other people have learned a ton as well. Here's my other hope. I hope that one day, Ivor, you can come to Old Lyme. I hope it's not too long in the future. I think you're speaking a language that many folks in our community deeply appreciate and understand. And I would love for you to meet some of the folks here in person. And it would be interesting to invite some of these practitioners that
Yeah.
I've been in touch with to join you as well, and to see if we couldn't do a whole event. I also like the idea. This is a little bit more, but I don't know. Going to Africa, man.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I've had nothing but great experiences there.
Yeah.
And I've learned, so I'm so grateful to Africans. As an American who understands that this is part of our heritage too, no matter what we look like, African heritage is part of who we are. And the Africans are by and large very welcoming, inclusive people. That's why their culture has been survived so well, because they share it. They include, and that and it's been very useful to create solidarity across the Americas.
Yeah. Yes.
So very powerful stuff.
This is powerful stuff. Yeah. All right, we're going to bring this to a close.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay.
Nice to meet you all, and we'll keep talking, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will. We will. All right.
La luta continua.
Yes,
The
indeed.
struggle continues.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, listen, to all of you out there, thank you for watching. There will probably be some who watch this as a recording as well. But really, thank you for tuning in and for taking this deep dive into this transatlantic conversation we've been having with Ivor Miller. And Ivor, once again, thank you so much for offering this for us.
Thank you for having me.
Really, all right.
Really been great.
Okay. Take care, and I'm gonna sign us out here.
Okay. Ciao for now.
All right. Bye, Ivor.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.